My name is Michael Stone. I'm the Director of Innovative Learning for the Public Ed Foundation in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I work with the Volkswagen E-Labs and the digital fabrication ecosystem here. We have the world's largest collection of education-based fab labs anywhere in the world. We manage a network of 23 school-based fab labs available to public school students here that are fully integrated in the public school system. I want to introduce our panel, and we're going to jump right into some conversation around what maker education looks like in a post-COVID world. Maybe a little optimistic thing about post-COVID already, but how about a COVID-impacted world? So I'm going to look around my screen and call out the names here as they show up for me. Paula Mitchell is first on my list. Paula, if you'll introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Paula Mitchell. I'm in Oakland, California. I'm a longtime educator, spent all of my time in Oakland public schools, focusing on elementary education, K-6, and I am currently a teacher on special assignment, which means I'm an instructional coach at an elementary school, Grass Valley Elementary in Oakland, and where I started our maker-centered learning program and our makerspace. And I also split my time as a director for Agency by Design Oakland, where I focus on the fellowship aspect, and it's a fellowship of Oakland teachers, both public and charter, and one independent school. And we have a year-long fellowship where we go into the pedagogy behind maker-centered learning and are really inquiry-based, and have teacher fellows work in their own classrooms on inquiry around maker-centered learning. And I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Paula. Aidan, you're next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aiden Mullaney. I am currently in Maine, but most of my work resides in Boston. I am the manager of instruction for a mobile fabrication lab that goes to public schools, public middle schools in Boston to teach students in those schools, as well as teachers, digital fabrication skills that they can then integrate into their classrooms and create these types of kind of learning communities that everyone here hopes to see more of. So thanks for having me.
Sorry about that. I had a mute issue. Thank you, Aidan. Jill, you're next on my list. Jill Levine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Levine, and I've been a teacher and a principal. I'm currently work as the Chief of Innovation and Choice for the Hamilton County Schools, which is a school district in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with about 45,000 kids. Big part of our department is focused on the whole idea of making things particularly digitally. We have 18 digital fabrication labs that we refer to as E-Labs in our district, and are adding 5 more when school reopens. So actually realized that we have the most in schools of anywhere in the world. So we're excited about that. We're also adding one with a local community college. So it will be like a K-14, just huge maker space. And that's just a little bit of our work.
Thank you, Jill. And Vishal.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm Vishal Sachev here. I am at the University of Illinois. Been there for about 12 years. So I'm a professor in the business school, which is an unlikely place to have a maker space, but we did set one up 6 years back, and we like to call ourselves the first who did that in a business school. And we have curriculum and we are an open access lab and curriculum for kids as well over the summer, and we moved online this summer. We also have curriculum online globally available on Coursera with a series of courses, printing hardware and software, and sort of business applications of that as well. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Vishal. So as we were planning this and framing this out, we realized that anytime you have a panel discussion in person, the goal is often to make it more of a conversation than just hearing 4 people's responses to the same list of questions. That's a challenge to pull off in person. We decided to take it a step further and try to pull the same organic conversation off in a virtual environment. So I appreciate everyone in attendance today who's willing to be flexible and patient with us as we try to navigate that. Paula, I'm going to direct the first question to you, and we'll just work the first question around the group, and then, as we talked about, feel free to interject, and we want to make this as conversational as possible. So as we were planning this work, we're really trying to think about this idea that we know that the pandemic continues to have a significant impact on education, both structurally and education practices across the country. As educators from K-12 in formal settings as well as informal settings, as educators grapple with the changes that are being ushered in with this pandemic, the impact of the pandemic, I'd love to hear from your perspective and within your sphere of influence, what do you see as in store for the future of maker education?
That is a huge and wonderful question. And I think that now more than ever, we actually see the need for maker education. From my perspective at the K-12 level and really elementary, and especially early elementary, we know that kids, they're doing the best they can with online learning, but so much has happened so quickly that many kids actually are deciding to opt out and tune out. And we need to find ways to really engage kids. We need things that really spark joy for them. And I see maker-centered learning and maker education as one of the key things that we can use to really re-engage kids and get them excited about learning, whether or not we're online or in person, or a hybrid model, but really providing hands-on, authentic learning experiences for kids. And that really listening to kids, because they've been in the last 3 or 4 months a completely different environment than ever before. And in order to be responsive to what kids are going through, we need to actually ask them what is interesting to them and then build off that. And I think maker education and maker-centered learning is perfect for that. When we're doing it in a really authentic way, in a learner-driven, this is truly student-centered learning. It's a great opportunity to listen to children, find out what they're interested in, and then connect what we feel we need to teach as educators through their lens and with a hands-on bent. And also, I think that another future of maker education is really going to be home-based, particularly because we don't know what the next year or so is going to bring as far as education goes. We are probably going in and out of in-person education. And from my perspective as an urban educator, my district has a lot of the issues with the digital divide and making sure that everybody has access to technology, the internet, devices. So it's really important to actually bring families into the conversation and to get them involved with the projects, and also to honor and respect what's happening in the home that's already related to maker education. So if there's the cooking that's happening at home, or if somebody is a mechanic or a carpenter or does coding or anything like that, like to find out what's already happening in kids' homes and then make that a part of your program as well. So really honoring the home culture and figuring out ways to incorporate that into our programs, I think is going to be a big part of maker education going forward, particularly if we want to keep kids engaged, because they are opting out right and left right now. And as I said, I think maker education is one of the best ways to engage children in authentic learning experiences.
Thank you. I've never heard that spin before. That's a really interesting angle on how to incorporate empathy in the learning process, is by capitalizing on what making looks like at home. That's a really fascinating angle on that. Thank you for sharing. Aidan, in a similar lane, considering your experience with sort of mobile making and mobile maker education, through that lens, what's coming down the pike for you? Maybe different safety regulations, or where do you see the future of making, particularly in this mobile makerspace world that you live in?
Yeah, so I look at it from a school and teacher and student perspective, because those are the main audiences that we serve on the mobile lab at the Fab Foundation. I think for schools, it means a more thoughtful approach to student learning, and really kind of understanding what makes for a good learning experience with students. And most of the time that includes the use of project-based learning and incorporating informational and helpful technologies. So for teachers, that also means maybe more time to play and to tinker around with a tool that maybe school day schedule wouldn't normally allow them to. Play with tools that are both digital and physical in nature, and sharing those tools with their students. And I think for students, they are then now at home or potentially in the classroom in some cases, in some kind of hybrid scenario. But I think students are, because they're working from home, they're able to kind of see themselves as makers and as these types of learners, because they're forced to kind of find what's around them, find cardboard like the basketball hoop that's behind me, and make something out of that, engineer a solution based on what the materials that you have in their home. And so it kind of demystifies the idea that, oh, I need to be in a special space, or I need to be a certain person in order to be that type of person, that maker. And so hopefully, I see this as this COVID world that we're living in as an opportunity for makers.
Again, really insightful there. When we talk a lot about sort of maker mindset, right, and seeing your identity as a maker, not as a location. That's really interesting how you're teasing that out, and I appreciate that. Jill, you're next on my screen here. I'm going to come to you. I don't want to pull an answer in particular here, but I am really curious. Knowing, love to hear you speak a little bit to what access looks like in the community, and also through this lens as we consider bringing making to such a large, diverse, and geographically large footprint that your school district serves. What do you see as sort of the future of making, both in the immediate and perhaps a little bit in the long term?
Yeah, well, I will say I completely agree with Paula that like right now we need to focus on engagement of students probably more than anything to try to convince them to come back to learning in August in whatever form it takes for us. And also, I think, this whole COVID situation, I shouldn't call it thing, has really just made us think a lot more about the importance of problem solving and helping kids to learn to be problem solvers, because this is a great example of this tremendous problem, and you've got to go at it and try to fix it and come up with a plan, and you're going to fail, and you got to get back to it and keep going and as someone on a district leadership team, and we're spent all summer trying to figure out how do we reopen school, right? And we know there are going to be a lot of failures. So, a couple of things jumped to mind. One was when we first closed down, I actually sent an email to Michael because I'd seen a tweet about some people who were creating face shields, and we had a huge PPE issue in our local hospitals. We were hearing that from doctors. And so we very quickly, with adults, but with teachers who run our e-labs, came up with a plan and brought all of our 3D printers, created a huge 3D printer farm at our local STEM school, and started creating face shields. We made about 7,000 of them that we were able to give to hospitals and local medical providers. And while students weren't involved in that whole process, the teachers and the adults were going through this process of understanding, like empathizing, understanding what doctors needed, creating prototypes, figuring out the best way to make these, and then 3D printing on 70 printers, laser cutting foam to go inside and the Mylar to go in front, and then experimenting with how do you attach this to your head. We started with rubber bands, those hurt. We ended up Nike or Under Armour, donated like thousands of these hair bands for us, and so what started to happen is teachers started to live stream to their classes while in this 3D printer farm and to talk about this process. And I thought that was a great example, like to remind adults of kind of how challenging this work can be, but how important it is. The second thing for us, this summer is that we've tried to continue to engage kids all summer. So we launched a 6-week series of design challenges. We've had hundreds of kids sign up. We went to all of our food distribution sites and signed kids up there and provided them with maker kits. So really tried to hit sort of our low-income communities and encourage families to sign up and be part of this. So the design challenges launch every Monday somewhere in our community with a community partner saying, here's a problem I have, help me solve it. The kids have all week to create their designs, and then they come back to a Zoom meeting on Fridays and present what they've created with groups of kids who then can ask questions or give feedback. They're also doing Flipgrid videos, so they can post their videos and then comment on each other's videos. So I think it's been a really good way to test out that model and think about how can we continue, our maker movement, even if our kids can't come into our labs and can't be in school. For us, in terms of like equity, Michael, since you asked that, I mean, providing the materials and sort of providing a framework to encourage, kind of inspire, and then encourage kids to stay involved has worked. We're also working on a whole separate project to get, we've about 17,000 homes of families who are economically disadvantaged who don't have high-speed internet. So we're also working on a plan to hopefully get that completed by late December, early January for all of those families.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jill. Vishal, we're going to come to you, and I'm going to ask you basically the same question about what does the future of making look like, but as you shared in your introduction, you come at this from a pretty unusual angle, being a professor in a college of business who's embraced a maker education mindset.
Sure, thank you. I think we serve many audiences, right? So I serve the K-12 market in the summer. We serve the university audience the rest of the year, and we also serve the community and any businesses. And since we are able to interact online as well, we essentially serve anybody across. I mean, we've had companies from Australia order something on us for delivery to somebody in the US, and this was before we had 3D printing as a service available to everybody. But I mean, and we've been online for some time with our curriculum across the world. So we serve, many of our learners on Coursera are, PhDs or engineers or, people who are just looking to learn some stuff. So we get a lot of, and of course we're in a business school, so we do try and focus on how does making in general and digital fabrication change the way we do work, the way we innovate, the way we produce. So we get to do a little bit of everything. I mean, and specifically to the the issue, how does making change or look like now or in the near future? I think the most, and I'm probably echoing what was said in a panel probably 2 hours back, and some of you were probably there, is that, and I think also referred to here, is anytime you have, I think Aidan was mentioning that when you get some kind of a constraint, right? So not being able to meet in spaces and having access to tools is a constraint. Constraints invite creativity, right? So, or necessity is the mother of invention. And so we are doing that. We are innovating. We are, finding new ways to engage, new ways to come together virtually, and then with some kind of, access to spaces. We are changing the way we work. We are changing the way we think. And Paula's point on engagement is certainly a problem. And maybe the home is your maker space, but we got to figure out how to bring the community together, how to make tools or kits accessible, and make that sort of part of the challenge. I think the benefit from all of this is that more of us see ourselves as makers. And I think that sort of mindset, which is, almost the center point of any, and I think, I love the work I've said that earlier as well, the work that Agency by Design does is that people need to feel that they have agency in the process. I think that's the biggest challenge we face when people come into our spaces, or the people who are scared to come in is, what do I do, right? I don't know if I can, or I don't know if this place is meant for me. And being in a home and being exposed to a challenging context, right? Okay, I may have the capability to help with a face shield, or I could learn to sew, to make a mask. We are seeing kids from robotics clubs. My daughter is in one of those. They have sort of a distributed manufacturing setup trying to assemble face shields. And then the issue of engagement can be handled. So we have motivation now to do something meaningful in the community. Jill was talking about 7,000 masks by all these teachers and staff. At Illinois, we had a big PPE production effort that we were part of. 100 people got together. Nobody's getting paid anything, and they're coming together remote with a few people who have access to. We have a Fab Lab as well. So the motivation and the community, and we are lucky in a university town to have a good set of maker spaces that have been brought together into a network. So I think we're going to be fine. We probably have a lot more new routines that we've developed, more sharing, more networks. I think one of the, I don't know if they are sponsors of the open source health supplies kind of initiative. I was looking at their website earlier, again, fostering community. So I'm pretty positive. We made good use of a crisis.
There's so much to unpack from those first 4 responses. We may just just keep talking about that over and over again. Thank you, that was great. And I put it in the chat, but the idea that constraints invite creativity, I've never heard that phrase like that, but that's gold. Love that. It's so applicable in so many areas. Okay, so I want to open up for the whole panel, and feel free to just jump in here at your discretion. Aiden mentioned something, and Vishal sort of leaned into it a little bit as well. This idea of viewing the impact of the pandemic on maker education, perhaps just on education, as an opportunity, as the idea that the pandemic could be a catalytic force for transformation, for ushering in new ways of thinking about teaching and learning, and what that looks like, where that looks like, thinking about sort of all of the components that could go into that. Dr. Gary Steger uses this phrase a lot as he tries to, I won't say what he's trying to do, I'll let him speak for himself on that, but he uses this phrase a lot. He says, there's a clear tension between content acquisition and learning as a consequence of rich experience. For me, my personal experience with maker education, that phrasing captures a lot of the potential value in maker education, period, much less in a post-COVID world or in a pandemic impacted world. As you think about the impact that you've seen from the pandemic, from the virus on education, love for anybody that's willing to hop in here and speak a little to this idea of, as Paula alluded to, in what at our best speculation we would call probably some sort of hybrid learning environment, some mixture of in-person and online distance learning narrative that unfolds at least over the next 6 to 12 months. How do we get to these ideas? How do we cultivate rich learning experiences that have previously been highly associated with access to specific technologies? What does this look like? So I'll try to phrase that question more succinctly to say, how do we cultivate rich learning experiences, or learning as a consequence of rich experience, in a hybrid or distance learning model?
I can jump in here. I think for us, at least I know when I was a learner, I'm always a learner, but when I was a student in middle school especially, I always thought, when am I ever going to use this information in the real world? And I think now more than ever, if we teach project-based learning around creating solutions to this pandemic through the development of PPEs, that right there is an incredibly hands-on and relevant and interesting, hopefully, application of that learning. I think students, we know this is a thing that affects everybody. And so this is a way for students to feel connected, both to each other, to the teachers, and to the larger community that they serve if they're working on, for example, creating PPEs or other devices like that. It also encourages students to have to work on a device that they might not see the final result. And so they need to make sure that their design meets the needs of the consumer or meets the criteria of the rubric that, say, the teacher has created without actually touching that final design. So for us at the Fab Foundation, we've been actually sending teachers digital fabrication tools like 3D printers and vinyl cutters directly to their houses so that they can learn the tool and then actually have the students design some of the creations that they will then either print or cut, fabricate in some way. And so students are going to be forced to design using various design softwares and have whatever they're designing be sent to the teacher with the hopes that they got everything right before it's actually printed or cut. So I think there are a ton of both relevant and kind of community building exercises that as a result of this world that we now live in.
Thank you, Aiden. I want to leave that open. Anybody? Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Aidan. And I also think that uncoupling making from, which I think maybe you said, from that specific place, from the Fab Lab or from the makerspace, and having kids develop that maker mindset, and also teachers understanding that making can happen anywhere. And as we move in and out of school settings and home settings where we know learning is happening everywhere, that's been the big thing, making happens everywhere. And that making is not just in your makerspace or your Fab Lab, and helping communities see that the things that are already happening there are making, and having kids see that they can actually have an impact on their community through cultivating that maker mindset of figuring things out, finding a problem that needs to be solved, and then coming up with ways to solve it, figuring out designs, presenting design challenges that target a very specific community and the ones that kids live in, and what they can do to help solve a problem in that community. So making it very, I think, very centered around them. I keep coming back to the home and communities, but because I really believe that in the end is where we're going to have a lot of impact, or some of the most impact.
Yeah, I think for us as well, one of the things we've...
Oh, Jill, you went on mute.
Hitting some button. With our design challenges this summer, I'll give you one example. The launch was inside the dome that's in the Chattanooga Choo Choo, which is former train station, now a sort of tourist attraction / hotel in Chattanooga. And there was conversation with the woman who led the renovation. And then the challenge for the kids that week was to create their own dome, to build something or digitally create something. And they did a huge range of things, but they also researched different methods for building domes and learned some geometry or some math as part of that. And so there was value there, but I think even the greater value was the student presentations on Friday, where they shared their thinking. They shared how they made things, kind of their thinking behind their construction. And they asked questions, and I just watched as they were all, I mean, some of these kids are kindergartners. It was K through 8 in different parts of the day. And, at some points it would be like you'd see this sea of wiggliness of all these little kids on the Zoom screen, right? But as kids were holding up their projects, you just see everybody's kind of lean in and stare. And I just think that we can't sort of value the richness of kids learning from each other as they share the things that they make and talk about their own learning in that context.
Vishal, I want to come to you as well, give you an opportunity to respond to that. Jill, as you were sharing that on the back end, I was thinking about the idea that something I learned from you about how do we empower students, or not how do we, but just creating ways to empower students to show their thinking, right? To make their thinking visible. And it's an interesting notion that distance learning platforms provide, in an interesting way, perhaps a better avenue for students to show their thinking, to make their thinking visible as they collaborate. If you think at a simple level of like collaboratively building a Google Doc, right? Something that's simple. As you do that, we can show our thinking in a way that's less disruptive, right? It's not as loud as if we were in a classroom. That provides an interesting conduit, and obviously provides a very tangible example of how we can make our thinking visible. Vishal, I'll come back to you. Apologize.
Sure, no. I mean, I just want to echo, Paula's focus on the home as the place is very valuable. I mean, we see that, I mean, all of us probably see that at homes is, I have a teenager and actually 2 teenagers now, one recent entrant into the teens, and they are significantly disengaged with what's happening in online, right? So, but they are engaged when, at least one of them is, when she gets involved in a robotics group and does something which has impact in the community. But that's a big challenge because you've got people working from home. So getting the family as the center of making and getting engaged, it's almost like, even though we have school, we probably need to pay a lot more attention sort of to homeschool to do effective, to get our kids to take on new challenges. But that's probably a good thing. Another thing that might benefit, and I've seen that happen with my kids, is that I've encouraged them to become sort of the teacher. And I've had this option because we've done camps at the Maker Lab, and my kids have done this so many times that I've just said, hey, go volunteer and help out other kids in this online camp, because almost everybody gets stuck much more than what you could do in a face-to-face. So I think having or encouraging kids or anybody else to rapidly become sort of a mentor or teacher provides for much more engagement than what they would do just attending another online or hybrid. So that might be something to pick up on for engagement.
Thank you, Vishal. I love the theme here. So the audience knows we don't rehearse these panels ahead of time. So I'm getting this information fresh just as you are, but it's encouraging to me as we speak to thought leaders and innovative education leaders across the country, that there's some consistent through lines that we're hearing. This idea of space matters, but it's not essential, right? That access to highly engaging instruction is critical here. And how do we craft experiences that engage students, whether it's in a virtual or an in-person setting or some hybrid of the two? But those are critical components. As I think back on maker education and really see sort of, if I'm thinking about it from a high level view, I think you can make an argument that high quality maker education sort of stands on as if it were a 3-legged stool, that all 3 legs really hold equal value or important value. There's this notion of technical fluency that we hope to help students grow in technical domains. There's this idea of essential skills, like STEM essential skills, thinking of things like effective collaborators, creative problem solvers, right? So these sort of soft skills that are less tangible but still important. And then there's also in both informal and in informal settings, there's this idea of how do we shift how students engage in content mastery, right? As a dad, I'm a dad of 4 young daughters. I need them to learn to read, right? Numeracy skills are still important skills. And I don't think that they are necessarily in opposition. I think they're in support of and can be acquired through maker education initiatives. So that's a bit of a ramble to set this next question up. But what I'd like to ask is, as you think about sort of those 3 pillars, this technical fluency, these essential skills, and this idea of content mastery, if those are 3, maybe they're not the 3, but if those are 3 pillars of maker education, as you think about the impact of COVID, what does that look like? I think this could be positive or negative impact. What does it look like? What's the impact on maybe in those 3 domains of technical fluency, essential skills, and content knowledge? I'll drop those 3 in the chat so you have them to think from.
I'll take
Vishal,
a
yeah.
shot. Yeah, I think the most important is perhaps the motivation going in or engagement, and then I think once you got that sorted out, and we've had some luck with, because there has been a significant shock and we've had a need and people have responded, community members, schools, kids, whatever. And I think the second most important is the essential skills, which unfortunately is not very well developed on Zoom, right? That requires physical presence, that requires shouting at each other and then making up, that requires arguing, and that doesn't transcend very well to video calls. So I think that's our biggest challenge. The technical fluency, of course, if you need access to the space and the tools, there are some problems there. But I think our biggest challenge to solve is the soft skills, because that's the mindset. That's so assuming we've got the motivation and the handled, the next challenge is the soft skills, and I don't have an answer to that in this purely online or hybrid world right now.
Great. I'll look at the other three panelists. Aiden?
Yeah, I think that's something we also are struggling with, especially as we get, we worked with 2 schools through the mobile lab program so far, and those groups of students. And I think it's difficult to get students to sometimes turn their camera on, especially at middle school when they're always kind of worried about their appearance. But I agree. I think that sometimes that building a community isn't easy when you're a box on a screen. And I think it means we have to do a better job of kind of reaching out to students, of making things relevant to students, like everyone here has said. But it also means just trying to meet them where they are, and kind of I think it means being a more compassionate as educators. Not everybody's going to have the same tools in their and around them to build, to make, and so it's a lot of the projects that we do. We developed an unplugged program where teachers, educators, parents can work with their student at home to use the craft materials that they have around them to develop those tools. And when we originally put out a material list for these lessons, we got immediate feedback saying, well, I don't have cardboard, or I don't have a soda bottle. And my response was, that's okay. You don't need those. That's, build whatever you can, and make from what you have around you to solve those problems. And I think from there, then they can see themselves as that maker, as that fabber, as we like to say. But it means coming at it from a more compassionate lens, which is absolutely part of those essential skills that you mentioned. But yeah, I think it's a real challenge. The technical fluency and the content knowledge, I think those are things that we can work on every day. But I think essential skills are going to be the piece that we maybe miss most and need to work on or focus more as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that when you're talking about constraints, the creativity, we have to get really, really creative in figuring out ways to have kids collaborate when they can't be in the same space, and to meet different challenges with those essential skills, or the soft skills, as you call them, which are really, I think, some of the most important skills. And figuring that out is a huge challenge. I think one of the ways that I've seen educators do that is to create small communities, like of 3 to 4 kids, and then working with them and having them work with each other and figuring out, and then like kind of giving them a challenge, and then setting them to it and letting them figure out how they're going to work together and figuring out ways to collaborate, to get in touch, because kids are they're actually really, really creative, and they figure out ways to use like TikTok and Snapchat and other ways to do things that as an educator, like an older educator, I never would have thought of, So in some ways, I think trusting kids more to be the leaders or figure out channels to get things done is something that we need to do. Oftentimes we feel like we need to have all the answers, and we know we don't have all the answers. We're in unprecedented territory. So presenting kids with, hey, this is what we want to try, let's figure it out together. It's like that's what we do as makers. Yeah, just giving them more trust to lead their learning, I think is going to be key for all of these areas.
I love leaning into trust in that conversation. We talk with our teachers all the time about teachers being contextual experts, that they understand their student population in a way that maybe people outside of their school don't, and how to interact with their community. And after school providers, care providers similarly have that contextual expertise. Paula, as you're talking about the home kind of becoming the center of making for the foreseeable future, where else are you going to find more contextual expertise than with the practitioners themselves, the students themselves? That's phenomenal. Love that idea. There's a couple of questions coming in the chat. I'm going to read, I've got two of them. I'm going to read them both off, and feel free, whoever would like to jump in here. One of them, what can be done? Joel Leonard asked, what can be done to help immigrant kids that were separated from their parents? And the second from Maria Escuela, apologies if I mispronounced that. Does anybody have advice on youth-led programs?
So I can maybe tackle the first question from Joel about immigrant children and separated from their parents. The Fab Lab network is a global network, and so we're all over the world, over 1,800 Fab Labs, close to 2,000 now, meaning we're everywhere. And so that means that there also are Fab Labs in areas where there are needs for social impact and humanitarian relief. And so there are a bunch of Fab Labs that are popping up that are there specifically to address these refugee populations or populations for people who have been displaced. And some of these labs, there's some in kind of the Middle East, as well as South America, I believe, as well. But they create labs and these, kind of hybrid maker spaces that are then able to create the tools that are necessary for those communities and for the people who are in desperate need of the types of tools that they themselves are calling for. There are a lot of different Fab Labs that address a lot of different needs, but I think that's maybe one way that some of these humanitarian labs can address some of those more humanitarian needs.
Thank you, Aidan. The next question was posted privately, but I'll restate it. Does anyone have advice on youth-led programs?
Just one thing I thought about there is just student-run businesses. We had a school that in their e-lab created, it was called Lightning Orthotics, where kids were talking to people who had different needs, and then building orthotics to support them, and just really going through the design thinking process. They quickly turned that into a business, and the students, these were middle school students, elected someone to be the CEO of the business and other people to serve in different roles, and then used the profits from that to donate to a local charity. So I think there are definitely opportunities within these types of maker, communities of kids to kind of turn them into businesses and have students really lead the process.
Thank you, Jill. I want to make sure we get to Sonia Pryor-Jones' question as well, and we are at our 5-minute warning. So I'll ask. This is a big question. Could probably do a whole panel on this. So would appreciate thoughtful and succinct remarks here. If each of you could use this moment of COVID and racial injustice to rethink making and learning, what would you envision?
Well, to me, I think about our maker spaces as, providing access to kids who might otherwise not have them, probably similar to Aiden's buses, right? Like we're giving kids opportunities to have a richer educational experience, whether they're building an electric car or running a business or just, you know, printing something in a 3D, you know, printer for the first time. But to me, it's very much equity driven as we sort of choose the locations for where we place these labs and select the materials that we provide for kids. So I think about one of our schools in particular that's a high poverty, one of the lowest performing in the state schools, and we put an e-lab there, and it's totally transformed the school. The kids are now on this traveling electric car team. Their kids running businesses. I mean, you just walk in and it's just this deeply rich learning experience, and kids are coming in after school, they're coming in on snow days, they're coming in on the weekends. This is all pre-COVID, but because they want to be part of this just ecosystem of making in the school. And so to me, that just providing opportunity is one of those ways.
I'll open up to anyone else who wants to respond there.
I think I'll take a shot. One of the things that, I mean, it's not optimal, but one benefit I have seen is that we have a lot more, I mean, this panel wouldn't have happened if we didn't have COVID, right? 70 people from across the globe getting together to share, you know, or, you know, this is probably one panel, there were several. Our camps that went online, we've got some people from Canada taking our camps. That never would have happened. And we are shipping the prints to them, right? That wouldn't have happened. When we put our curriculum online on Coursera, you know, 40,000 people across the world learned something about digital fabrication. Now, if you fast forward today and everybody's putting stuff online and finding creative ways, that wouldn't have happened if COVID didn't happen. So certainly in terms of, yes, I know, half the world or more does not have good internet access, so they are still excluded. But at least the other half, which, 1% of them would ever come to a maker space, now maybe 5% of them know more about what's possible because it's accessible online. And when we return to somewhat a normal life, those 5% will walk into a Fab Lab.
And I think I see it from a different perspective in that I feel like this time with the pandemic has made everyone really have to slow down, pay attention to what's really important, listen to each other, and see people in ways that they've never seen them before. And I think that's really important and something that I hope continues post-COVID, that we continue to listen to each other and really see each other as people, and that everybody's story is important, everybody's culture is important, that making is something that has been happening forever. It's what makes us human. We create things, and that one form of making is not necessarily better than another form. And that when kids recognize that they are makers inherently, that they believe that what they're doing has value, then they can become part of the solution. And when people start to see each other as having value, then we can actually find solutions to the world's problems in a much better, richer, more diverse way. So that's what I hope for.
Paula, I'm not going to editorialize that at all. Super powerful. Wow. Let's end on that home run. Dorothy Jones-Davis is with us from Nation of Makers. Thank you for letting us be a part of this community, for helping foster community across the globe, across the country in this work, and helping us all find our identity in this. Dorothy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, and thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate each of the panelists for joining us today. Paula, the last word that you just said just really resonated with me personally. And I think that it's powerful that our youth are able to see examples of adults acting right and that we're, providing an education to them. So I very much also agree with you that I hope that type of seeing one another actually does continue on. I just wanted to remind everyone that today was amazing, and today is not the last day of the Capitol Hill Maker Faire. So usually this is the time where I come in with some closing remarks to try to tell you something deep and send you off into the world to realize the impact of the Maker Movement. I think you heard so much today, different aspects of how this situation that we're in during COVID has only amplified what we all know is the impact of the Maker Movement, us being able to see that and to see each other, right? And so the good news is that we'll continue this conversation tomorrow. It's a little different. On our second day tomorrow, depending on where you're at, it'll either be 1 p.m. or 10 a.m. So it's 1 p.m. Eastern time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. We'll have our maker showcases. And I really invite you to go back into the Sketch app and check out some of our makers. We have dozens of makers from across the United States. And actually, I think some people added themselves in today, so there might even be more. But we have lots of makers that are wanting to showcase the work that they're doing. So it's your opportunity to sort of see, it's the spirit of the Maker Faire where you get to do the best show and tell and see what everyone's doing. People are doing things in very different ways. So we have some panels and presentations, videos, demonstrations. We have some games. We even have a maze by the Numbers lady, who's a really awesome maker in the DC metro area. So there's just lots of opportunity. And so I encourage you, since this is an education panel, please do tell other folks this is a great opportunity. It's kid friendly. So we encourage people to join and continue the conversation and to join us tomorrow at the Maker Faire. This has just been such a special day, and I thank you all for your time today and wish you all well and see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye, Dorothy.